Joined here by Republican House Minority Leader Patrick Neville of Castle Rock. You oppose supervised injection sites. We learned today that there's not a bill going through the legislature this year by Democrats on that. Put this victory for Colorado conservatives into some context.
It's pretty significant for us. Obviously, we don't have the votes to stop it. If it were to come up, we really had to rally the troops outside the Capitol and really educate the public on what was going on, and their voices overall were heard, and that's a pretty significant win for us at this point. I don't think it's over yet. There's talk about bringing it back next session, but for now, I think it's a pretty big win.
One of the concerns that you expressed to me was that you didn't want school children visiting the Capitol to see people who were under the influence of drugs right across the street on Colfax at what is now a needle exchange and was going to become the supervised use site. I imagine that a lot of the same concerns, people who are under the influence coming and going, exist right now with that needle exchange site. Correct?
Correct. There are some of those concerns that exist right now. I think this would even exacerbate that. You know, we heard concerns from people who own buildings near that area and other people that just have interest in that area too. And I can't think of anyone who would actually want this in their area next to their businesses.
Would you like that needle exchange site moved or shut down?
You know, I haven't looked into that, but you know, I think that we need to take a closer look at some of these policies. I think the needle exchange site is not an actual exchange site. We actually have state patrol that has to patrol the Capitol grounds quite often, and they actually have to pick up some of these needles. I've seen needles laying around nearby, so my worry is that it's become more of a giveaway than an exchange.
You said that supervised injection sites increase overdose deaths. What evidence do you have that these sites cause increased overdoses?
Well, I think that you can look at the Vancouver's coroner report, and you actually see a dramatic 750% increase in overdose deaths since the first site appeared. And although there might not be actual causation in that report, there's certainly correlation. And I would also.
Then why are you saying there's causation?
And well, I said that the reports have shown that this has not worked out for Vancouver. I mean, it started with one site.
You said that the sites result in increased overdose deaths. That's causation. I'm asking you, do you have evidence?
I think that their policies have resulted overall in a worse epidemic that's actually went on in Vancouver. And I would also say that they can't certainly show causation to show that these sites have prevented more overdose deaths, because the results show that we've actually seen more overdose results.
So just to be clear, I asked you if you had proof of your statement, and your answer is you can't prove the opposite?
No, there's causation and there's correlation. Mm-hmm. It's hard to prove either one of those, but I would say a 750% increase from the Vancouver's own coroner reports show that this certainly isn't working in Vancouver.
Sure, and that spike did not happen when the sites opened. It happened when fentanyl came into Vancouver, which is just nasty stuff.
That is part of the problem. And that's another thing we need to take a look at, and is actually look at federal policies to make sure these drugs don't get in our country in the first place.
So I know you take offense to the fact that the Democratic supporters of supervised injection sites say that you're fear-mongering. But when you make a statement like that these sites increase overdose deaths, and you don't have evidence to back it up, is that not fear-mongering?
No, it's truth-telling. I mean, what we've seen in Vancouver is exactly that, a 750% increase. So these policies haven't worked for Vancouver. I don't think they're going to work for Colorado. We've heard concerns from the people that are in these areas where these are being proposed. They don't want it there. And I think that those people need to have their voices heard, and that's what happened, and that's why we have now bipartisan opposition to this idea.
You used the recall word when you were here last time. Democratic Senator Brittany Pedersen, who supports these sites, says that your threat to recall Democratic legislators, or even one Republican who's going to be a co-sponsor, that was a fake controversy, that it didn't impact people's votes. What do you think?
I think it was made a huge impact on the policy overall. I think there are people out there that were seriously looking into recalls, and it wasn't just me, it's the grassroots activists that were seriously looking at this. And I think that probably factored into the fact that now there's plenty of Democrats out there that don't want to see this policy move forward.
Obviously, Republicans ran successful recalls against Democrats over gun control in 2013. Is governing by recall, when you're in the minority, a smart way to do things?
You know, when there's extreme overreach, that's something you have to look at. As we saw in this past elections, we actually brought up policies like this, told the voters that this might come, and a lot of people didn't believe it. Well, now we actually see it being proposed. So if it actually does move through, that's something we need to look at, because the voters were obviously lied to.
Hoping to hear later today from Republican Senator Kevin Ola of Henderson, who is going to co-sponsor this bill. You were non-committal when I asked you if you were going to run a recall election against a fellow Republican over this. Does Senator Ola belong in the Republican Party? Is he a good fit?
He is a Republican. His constituents sent him here. His party nominated him, so he's a Republican. I mean, Republicans, we're a big tent party, and we often disagree quite a bit, unlike the other party that typically marches in lockstep. But I think it's interesting, this is one of those issues where we're actually seeing they're not marching in lockstep in favor of this.
Yeah, I mean, if you run the dude out of the tent through a recall, I'm not sure how much you can say big tent. But to be fair, Democrats didn't have the votes in their own caucus to pass this. That's the reason why it died. They didn't have the Democratic votes. Speaking of another Democrat, Governor Polis, did you ask him if he would sign this bill? We couldn't get an answer out of him.
No, I've heard other people ask him, and our meetings with him are pretty short, and we like to spend time talking about policy that's already in existence.
All right, last question. I know your time is short here. So nobody involved in this doubts that the opioid epidemic is a real and increasing danger in Colorado. So where specifically can you find common ground with Democrats who are passionate about this issue, like Senator Pedersen, and move legislation this year?
I think, like I said, prescription authority for licensed clinical providers, getting mobile app technology to reduce the stigma, and then I think we need to work at the federal level to make sure these drugs aren't entering our country in the first place.
All right. House Minority Leader Patrick Neville from Castle Rock, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the Next YouTube channel for the best of Next and some other stuff.